know if my brother could see what happened to me after he died, he never would have done what he did. Because all of a sudden there's like a missing chair in your class.
It's not just a high school problem any longer. We're seeing it in our middle schools. We're seeing it with girls, not just boys.
The first suicide happened in the fall of my sophomore year, and that was just like a day I'll never forget.
Everybody wants to learn what happens if this happens. It was like a call to arms.
Hi, I'm John Ferrugia. Welcome to this final edition of Insight. During the pandemic, we're all becoming more aware of the need to monitor our own mental health like never before. Tonight, we're focusing on a subject no one wants to talk about, youth suicide, and specifically, how to prevent it. We all need to know what to do, how to ask for help before it gets to the point we really need help, and how to offer support for someone in crisis or who is drifting into a dark place. Tonight, we visit two communities more than 1,000 miles apart that have been through the worst when it comes to losing kids. What they have learned through loss can teach us all a lot about prevention.
My freshman and my sophomore year, people are like, oh, like what school do you go to? I'm like, oh, I go to DCC, and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I am Sienna Adams, I'm 18, and I just graduated from Discovery Canyon.
What is happening to our kids? At least 5 area teens took their own lives in the past month, plus another Colorado Springs teen over the weekend.
Like the first one that happened, everybody was like in shock, and nobody knew what to do. You're looking for the next burst. You're looking for the next person to burst, and you're just trying to talk to everyone, but you can't. And then there's a lot of guilt.
In Colorado Springs 5 years ago, an increase in youth suicide set the community on edge.
And I'd say it does put you more at risk, especially within those probably like first 6 months, because all of a sudden there's like a missing chair in your class, and teachers are like, do I leave the seats the same? Do I move the seats so everyone stops staring at that one specific spot? Like, it's this huge thing, and so it creates emptiness. It creates a lot of emptiness within the school.
The first suicide happened in the fall of my sophomore year at Gunn, and that was just like a day I'll never forget.
1,300 miles away in Palo Alto, California, Chloe Sorensen and her classmates also tried to absorb a loss.
But I'll just never forget kind of that moment of like people just like running out of classrooms crying. You don't have a lot of those moments as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old.
Then it happened again. Another classmate, another death.
And I went to this school board meeting 3 days later, and there were a lot of people there because this huge traumatic event had just happened.
We are all in this together.
And I just went up to the podium and like spoke. So instead of finding people to blame, find people to support. Support the school, support the staff, and most of all, support your kids. They need it more than you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe.
And so I kind of became this voice of the student body, and I just found that the resources in the community weren't enough.
Palo Alto and Colorado Springs, two very different communities facing the same crisis.
It was like a call to arms, right? And I remember sitting in the Colorado Springs Police Department, and they had this big conference room, and there must have been 70 of us. And this large circle from all walks of life.
Both communities were determined to make changes to save young lives.
I think we knew it was a massive mountain to climb, and many of us didn't know where to start, but we knew we had to start somewhere.
School districts across Colorado are always looking for the best ways to support kids.
We're starting to get really good in Jeffco at mental health promotion, starting at an early age, teaching social emotional learning curriculum.
Michelle Gonzalez runs the suicide prevention program at Jefferson County Public Schools.
It became obvious over the last couple of years, there's this giant gap where intervention and postvention could be happening.
Gonzalez says the district has lost too many students to suicide.
It's not just a high school problem any longer. We're seeing it in our middle schools. We're seeing it with girls, not just boys. So we're seeing a trend nationwide, not just in Jefferson County, that's very concerning. And so I just began digging in and researching and became this big-time learner and came across this really phenomenal toolkit online.
That toolkit offered specific school and community initiatives to address mental wellness and prevent suicide. Its lead author is a Stanford University psychiatry professor in Palo Alto, California, Dr. Shashank Joshi.
So the first part here is what's called a CRT, a crisis response team.
Lo and behold, one day I was in a conversation with him over the telephone.
What I was most impressed with Jeffco about was they were not hiding from this.
He was very interested in helping Jeffco Public Schools build a comprehensive model across our massive school district of 85,000 students and 14,000 employees.
Call ahead to the receiving agency or provider.
Jeffco has since started an ambitious goal of training for all of its staff in suicide prevention and has hosted trainings for hundreds of people in the community.
They fully embraced, we're doing a lot, but we could do more. Let's bring in people who've had experience in their communities and see if we can learn from one another. We're headed to the Milpitas Union High School District, one of the largest high schools in the entire county. We are going to be doing a toolkit training.
Dr. Joshi has taken his toolkit training on the road, from Jeffco to Pakistan to Mexico and across his county in California.
But part of the reason for this partnership is to get them familiar with this toolkit way before there's a crisis.
That toolkit has 3 areas of emphasis: promoting mental health and wellness, intervention to assist students in crisis, and postvention, how to respond after a suicide loss.
In some schools, 90% of the youth will say, I would tell an adult if my friend was suicidal, even if they told me to keep it a secret. But only about 50% will get help for themselves.
Dr. Joshi and his collaborators helped pass legislation in California requiring every school district in the state serving students from 7th to 12th grade to develop a suicide prevention policy. This training comes out of that law.
This was the culmination of a number of organizations, grassroots organizations, really identifying the need to provide this kind of education to young people. It's very rare for a young person to go through something like this and have none of their peers know.
Dr. Joshi's experience comes not only as a Stanford researcher, but also as a Palo Alto resident and parent who watched his community endure not 1, but 2 youth suicide clusters in recent years.
We had a group of teens who died by suicide in 2009-10, and then again in 2014-15.
For many in Palo Alto, talking about mental health has become an everyday part of life.
We want to welcome you to Palo Alto.
When we visited in February, before COVID, we found people gathered on a weekday afternoon for community training on suicide prevention. The city's 2 high schools have opened wellness centers to give students a place to talk.
The main issue is untreated mental illness.
This group of students served as advisors to pilot a new Stanford model for health care and counseling for youth in their community.
For me, when I was feeling stressed, to go.
It is a model they hope will be replicated all over the country, called Alcove.
We also needed community settings for young people to be able to have early access and a comfortable way for them, for those that didn't want to go talk to someone at a school.
Dr. Stephen Adelsheim is the director at Stanford Psychiatry Center for Youth Mental Health and Well-Being.
So as we went out looking for other models, we found this program in Australia.
When I first came to Headspace, I walked in, was greeted with a smile at reception. They gave me
in Australia, Headspace centers provide mental health support for 12 to 25-year-olds.
It's warm, it's inclusive, it's welcoming.
When we look at where young people are mostly coming into our systems right now, it's generally after a crisis.
Yeah.
Whether it's a suicide attempt or a drug overdose or something really much more severe, because we don't have these places and opportunities for the early care.
Plans are underway to start 7 Alcove locations across the state of California, including one in the heart of Palo Alto in a space of a closed-down gym. And Alcove's Youth Advisory Group, which has included Phoebe Cox, is helping to shape what those centers will become.
I struggled with depression, and so I was in the hospital sophomore year.
Her therapist told her about Alcove.
It gave me something to feel like I was actually making a difference, like I could actually have a voice in what was going on, and that they needed my voice.
And I ended up hospitalized at the end of my 8th grade for suicidal ideation, and I met people who had attempted.
Shraventi Shankar says she came to realize she and other young people are often waiting too long to get help. She hopes Alcove will change that.
Even if it's something as simple as I have a test in a couple weeks and I'm really, really stressed out, can I go talk to somebody to help me figure it out?
The Student Advisory Group is playing a major role in determining what Alcove will eventually look like.
Originally, we were talking about having the Alcove centers be open from like 9 to 5. And I vocalized that that wasn't going to be like work with student schedules because we have school, we have extracurriculars, and most of the time, like at least for me, when I was depressed, I felt more alone at night.
We involve them in the facility search. They're in all the interviews we do for staff. They're on our evaluation committee.
Vicki Harrison is a Stanford program director who's helping to make Alcove a reality.
It's not something that we're creating for them, it's something we're creating with them and alongside them.
In Colorado Springs, an integrated care option for all ages has opened its doors in Mitchell High School, an on-site clinic for the community offering medical, dental, and behavioral health care.
They know they can get mental health counseling, they can get, checkups for some of our female students, like things like that they can walk to. I mean, that's huge.
Maria Nichelle is the department chair of counseling at Mitchell High School. The clinic opened just a few months before COVID-19 closed the school, which Nichelle says has taken a huge toll on students' mental health.
A lot of the things that we've seen with students is anxiety and depression skyrocketing. So a lot of that is maybe they don't feel as accessible to us or accessible to teachers. Knowing that we have this clinic, it honestly gives them another reason to come near Mitchell.
We really try to treat mental health needs the same way that we would treat physical needs.
Shay Meissen is director of behavioral health for the Peak Vista Clinic in Mitchell High School.
We ask questions about mood and depression and anxiety and stress the same way we ask questions and look at your height and your weight and your blood pressure.
When I've attempted, it's not been like a sudden thing. It's been a building up from stuff at home, from stuff at school, and it all just kind of combined. And it made me feel just so trapped and like there was nothing else I could do to feel better, to make the pain go away, because that's all I wanted. My name is Phoenix. I'm 18 years old. I've lived in Colorado Springs, Colorado, all my life pretty much.
Phoenix identifies as non-binary and uses they pronouns, and we agreed not to use their real name. We met Phoenix at The Place, which provides shelter and assistance for young people experiencing homelessness in Colorado Springs.
I had asked my family and friends, I had asked everyone for help, but because of COVID, no one could help me.
Phoenix had survived a suicide attempt just last year.
I am trying to find my own place and get up on my feet. And The Place has been helping a lot, especially with like mental health and appointments. If I didn't have The Place, I would be stuck on the streets because I just don't have anywhere else to go.
We have a huge population of youth that are on the streets.
Megan Trosper is a case manager for The Place. There is growing understanding in the field of suicide prevention that programs like this one are key pieces of the prevention effort.
I believe strongly that the work that we are doing is helping decrease the amount of suicide attempts or completed suicides in our community.
If you break it down to the very basic needs of humans, right? So food, stability, housing, stability, and you really think through, if I don't have those things, I really can't focus on anything else.
Cassandra Walton is the vice chair of the Suicide Prevention Collaborative of El Paso County, which has identified financial stability as one of its pillars to prevention.
And so what we believe is that if we can help people have economic stability, they're going to be more likely to be able to manage their mental health.
One thing that we prioritize is what we call upstream suicide prevention. That means addressing some of these underlying factors that can contribute to suicidal despair or make life more stressful.
Lena Heilman is the strategies manager for the state of Colorado's Office of Suicide Prevention.
So addressing homelessness, food insecurity, safe and affordable housing, transportation, racism, discrimination, supporting LGBTQ+ individuals. And although they might not often get coded as suicide prevention, we know that these are protective against suicide.
Once we get our clients into housing, They let down their guard and they're able to find a sense of safety and a sense of security.
Phoenix hopes to find stable housing on the road to recovery.
I've grown quite a lot, and I'm finally becoming my own person and becoming the person that I want to be. And I see that life has more in store for me than just despair and sorrow like I thought it only had.
But to open it, and then you just pull.
In Colorado Springs, volunteers like Peter Leiser are spreading the word about ways to safely store firearms. Cassandra Walton runs the Pikes Peak Suicide Prevention Partnership. She works with volunteers like Peter on how to talk with people in the community about securing their guns.
El Paso County is pro-firearm. We have a lot of people who love to hunt here. They say, yeah, my kids are trained in firearm safety. They absolutely know how to use a firearm safely and how to handle it safely. What we're saying is that there is an importance to reduce the access to that firearm and create that pause in the situations where somebody is not mentally stable.
Basically, it's preventing,
Pete just happened to be here. He volunteers here once a week at our desk. And I was just kind of chatting with him, probably stepped up onto my soapbox a little bit and just said, if we were able to increase safe storage of firearms, we could have reduced our suicides last year by half. And then, we got into this conversation because it's a very personal issue for him.
I promised my son that I'd find a way to help other people, other families, so nobody'd have to go through the things that I've had to go through.
Peter moved to Colorado 3 years ago after his 14-year-old son Kyle died by suicide.
Here's a kid who was loved by everyone. The loss of someone by suicide affects so many people. It's like dropping a water droplet into a pond and seeing the ripples.
Last year we had 9 suicides by teenagers in El Paso County, and out of the 9, 6 of them were by guns.
The UC Health Memorial Emergency Room became one of the testing grounds for the study aimed at preventing youth suicide. Dr. Emmy Betts helped design the study conducted at emergency departments around the state.
It really was building on the question of how can we in emergency departments help parents prevent suicide when their youth are at risk. When there was a youth who was seen in the emergency department and had some level of suicide risk, the clinicians were supposed to counsel parents about locking up firearms, locking up medications at home.
During the study, emergency room staff gave families of suicidal youth locking devices for both firearms and medications.
It was very life-changing for me as an evaluator.
Andrea Wood is the Zero Suicide Coordinator at Memorial. She trains staff to screen every patient for suicide risk.
It gave us a specific skill about how to talk to families in regards to where they have guns located in their house. Something I learned from asking questions is I would ask a mother or a father and say, do you have weapons in your home, and can I ask how you store them and where they are at? And then when we would ask the children the same question separately, or teenagers separately, what they would share with us is, yes, it's in the closet and mom and dad keep the key. And they also know that a lot of time mom uses the combination and uses the child's date of birth.
Colorado has one of the highest suicide rates in teens in the country. We also know that many of those suicides occur with a relatively short period of planning, sometimes only minutes to hours. So locking up firearms, locking up other dangerous items when someone is at risk can really save lives.
It's especially important to lock up those deadly items because mental health professionals say most people who survive a suicide attempt do not try another method. The study took place at Memorial and 6 other emergency departments around the state, and experts say the results are promising.
What's really important is that we found at follow-up the families who had received counseling in the phase after training. Those families were at least twice as likely to have locked up firearms or medications at home. That really suggests that this kind of counseling by clinicians has an effect.
One of the most important things we can do is talk about these issues. Talk about suicide. talk about depression.
Peter Leiser is now helping to look out for other families and seeking support for his grief.
People ask me, when will it go away, or when will the pain stop? It won't. And actually, I'm okay with that. Because that's one of the few things, that's all I got left.
Mark and I were our primary playmates growing up. Most of our time was on these two rocks. The one to this side was mine and this was his, and we used to, he probably wouldn't want to hear me say this as a boy, but we'd play house, and that was his, and that was mine.
Chris Cada's parents still own the home and property where she grew up in the wide open spaces of Colorado's mountains outside Loveland.
My childhood was magical.
But that childhood changed when Chris was 12. Her 15-year-old brother Mark, who she says was bullied in school, descended into hopelessness.
And then he went up on the hill and he killed himself.
Her brother had taken his own life in a place that was so special to both of them. And almost 40 years later, the searing pain of loss remains.
I know if my brother could see what happened to me after he died, he never would have done what he did.
For every young life that ends too soon, there is a family like hers, left with a lifetime of questions.
The part of my brain where this happened to me is still 12, and it'll always be 12.
I didn't think I could have done anything different.
Only a few months after Mark's death, her parents agreed to be interviewed by a documentary team and included Chris.
It was up here on the ridge somewhere.
While the documentary focused on the Cada family, it also focused on the fact that according to the county coroner at the time, Mark was one death in a larger cluster of young people who had taken their own lives.
Loveland is a thriving valley town an hour's drive north of Denver in Larimer County, a county with 12 cases of adolescent suicide and self-destruction in 18 months since the spring of 1980.
Chris was never aware of a growing cluster, but understood the impact it was having on her and others who were shocked by Mark's death.
A lot of Mark's friends wanted to join him, and they would call me and ask why they shouldn't, and I was really struggling with why they shouldn't.
Chris Cada now teaches college students. She is writing a book dealing with her brother's death, her own journey, her ongoing anxiety, and suicide prevention.
The leading cause of death in Colorado, 10 to 24-year-olds, is suicide. So it's not just teenagers. I teach at CSU, and I have the privilege of seeing them twice a week for a couple hours. So I make a point of reaching out to them and just being like, wow, what's that like for you? What's going on with you? They embrace that. I still come up here like on holidays and stuff. I like to be here alone. I feel like when I'm alone, then I can talk to Mark, so. I knew him well enough that I know what he would say to me at different times, so I feel lucky about that. And if you have a brother or sister, tell them you love them.
After so much pain and loss in both Colorado Springs and Palo Alto, there are signs of progress and guarded optimism.
People take a deep breath and say, okay, hopefully it's in our rearview mirror now. And I know as a parent and as a clinician here, as a faculty member, as a researcher, that objects in our rearview mirror are closer than they appear. And we know that we still have a number of attempts every week that we see in the emergency room. We do, however, see that kids are way more connected now.
There's been a tremendous amount of progress in the community.
Chloe Sorensen, who watched Palo Alto's most recent suicide cluster unfold as a high schooler, is now a student at Stanford, studying psychology.
I feel like so much is different about the culture, the way that we talk about mental health. I feel like mental health is very out in the open now. There's a lot less stigma.
In Colorado Springs,
everybody wants to learn what happens if this happens. And of course, when you're put into it and you have to learn while you're in the middle of it and realize what best practices are and what's the best road out of a situation like this, so many people can glean from it.
The El Paso County Youth Suicide Prevention Work Group has brought together nearly 90 community partners, from police to schools to hospitals to faith organizations, to come up with a plan. That plan includes the work of David Galvan.
If you see the student that has been excelling, and then all of a sudden this loss of motivation, that should activate us and be like, oh, light bulb.
Galvan's organization, Education for a Lifetime, has trained staff in some schools, along with hundreds of youth pastors, in youth mental health first aid.
Self-harm is a mental illness. Fact, fiction, somewhere in between. Here's a research. Research suggests that it is fiction. Until they learn that new coping skill, we can't take that away from them.
They started this thing called Sources of Strength. I became a person that people could come and talk to.
Discovery Canyon graduate Sienna Adams also became a leader in prevention for her community, helping her peers through a popular program called Sources of Strength.
And so I have had a lot of very long conversations about why people should stay and who they can talk to, where are your counselors. It's late nights, it's early mornings, it's getting a call in the middle of the night and you wake up the next morning and you're like, crap, what did I miss? So it's really difficult and really mentally heavy and really mentally taxing, but pays off because somebody has to.
Sienna Adams says the work she did with Sources of Strength continues to shape her life, even after graduation. She says she has plans to become a 911 dispatcher.
911, what's your emergency? Trauma doesn't freak me out, and I can kind of be that calm voice. I've been the calm voice for suicidal people. I can be the calm voice for somebody going through the worst night of their life kind of thing, and I really want to do that and be on the other side for somebody.
Every day is just about reminding yourself that things get better, things get easier, and there's just things worth living for.
I guess you need to find the silver lining in everything you do. The whole point is to find that joy, to get out of depression.
One day you're just gonna wake up and you'll realize that you're doing better than you were 2 months ago or 2 years ago.
For somebody that's out there and struggling with suicidal thoughts, I wouldn't say that mine went away. And I've always got to remind myself about all the good things in my life, but also just realizing that you're not alone.